pull it up by email.
Terry just poked her head in and noted that we do not, we're supposed to have like a official laptop.
Okay.
And we do not have one.
Just letting you know you guys are live, so if you want to, not say certain things or whatever.
Like we're being recorded. We're being.
I don't know.
Are we being
Just help me out.
Yeah, thank you.
Good to know.
But if we can't get that slide up, it still is like, I can be like, if you go to our menu,
Great.
click this button, you'll find all of this.
And maybe I'll just. Maybe it makes sense to, it does make sense in that spot where you put it in the footer. So.
What makes sense?
Oh, to talk about the additional resources.
Oh.
That'd be great.
We got a very sweet last minute invitation from Modest Family Solutions to join their opening of their new farm stand in Bothell. They opened on Thursday.
Nice.
I told Josh that, I wouldn't be able to come because of the flooding and sort of stuff, but we were really excited for them that they were opening that. They have like a permanent stand in Bothell that they're making food for people.
Any update about the thing that we talked about?
You're gonna have to be more specific about what thing. Do you want to write something down? Like, do you want to write down a keyword?
The secret new farm.
Oh, no, but I was not able to join the last meeting, so, I haven't even been able to review all of the notes. All of what I know is that things are continuing to move forward positively, to the best of my knowledge, and there is the possibility of an additional opportunity in another community for another piece of.
The same owners?
No, this is somebody else who might be interested in getting it and then investing a bunch of infrastructure and then making a donation. So that is just like that's all the details I even know about that other than the location, which I can share with you later. So that's very exciting.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good.
I'll be your staff person today.
Oh, great. Do we have a laptop with the to put the slides up?
Terry should be bringing that.
Okay.
I think.
Great.
She didn't give it to me to bring down.
Okay. Dave, quick question for you. I was really excited that we can talk about Black Swamp. Do you feel I grabbed 3 salient points from the webpage last night, but if you feel like I know how to talk about
No,
this,
I don't.
Okay, then I will roll with my 3 salient points that I feel good about talking about. We have an exciting project that we only got the sign off yesterday to talk about publicly.
Oh, wow. Well, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, apparently I think the transaction went through Thursday night.
Cool.
Yeah.
That makes me really happy. Christina says hi. I talked to her this morning.
I guess I'll park myself by the door here.
Oh, that's the person I'm looking for. We will need your laptop.
For this one?
Yes.
Because they don't have one.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, for the room. For the room.
Yeah, okay.
We've had a mix-up.
I know how it goes.
I asked Carrie.
Well,
we were supposed to use hers, but then hers ended up being
no one shows up, I guess we still
Oh.
because there's people
I was like,
online.
There is that.
Technology.
But Anza, who's sat next
Where do you
to
want
me
to
for
set it up?
breakfast, she said she came specifically to see this, which was very sweet.
Cool.
I was like, you could have called me. And I came in last night at the round table, right sort of at the end, where we were talking about solutions in land access, and like
Yeah, I think I
hyped up the whole
Nice.
table.
Okay, great.
So I
That's
think
great.
we'll definitely have some folks attending.
And then I can try and show you how to get the class.
Do you think? I know that like that's the prior conversation about
Yeah.
new projects. Is there a way to like have the board be more looped in on?
Open.
It doesn't like quite sit when there's like we're talking about acquiring new land. There's something that doesn't quite sit right with me in terms of like not having the board looped into those conversations in a like up to the minute way. Like a once a month update doesn't seem
When this is done.
our job as the board to
Yeah.
acquire land.
Yeah.
And so
like the title
and
of
you're
each
not
section
there.
just needs to have a.
Yeah.
Oh,
And so when this is done, it's.
oh, cool, that's working.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you could go full screen. And then, before you do, let's go to the settings.
Probably will be asking different questions.
And.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think Ian would totally welcome more engagement on either of them. I think he's trying to err on the side of like not asking more than like people have capacity for. But I think A, that there's room for like, hey, I wanna be a part of this, and that would be welcome, and B,
Require signage
if
and
you just wanted like more frequent like updates as these are happening, that would be encouraged and allowed. And
Stretch to the max in terms of.
yeah.
So it might be easier to just like join conversations rather than ask for him to do a bunch of extra updating.
Well, he would probably just have me update you, and when my life is no longer on fire, then I will have more capacity to do that.
Yeah.
But I do know on the second one that I mentioned, I think generally the pattern is like,
I left the
once
charger
he knows
at
whether
my
it's
hotel.
a viable thing that
It's
might
got a
actually
good
move forward,
battery.
then
It'll be
bring
fine
it to the
for
board.
a session, maybe two, but I'll be, I can
And-
probably use it all night.
Yeah, I definitely had a sort of like, oh, I feel like I should be.
Well, I'm in this room.
Like,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
this, but like,
Okay.
I don't know,
Oh, really?
he has like such a deep
Maybe,
network
I
of
wonder if that's
relationships
to do with
that
the
like,
internet connection.
people present things to
Oh,
him
I
that they
mean,
wouldn't.
It's
I have
right,
that.
and
Yeah.
he's the top of the pyramid, for better or for worse, so.
Sorry, she's going over upstairs.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like capital B, capital.
I'm Anza, hi.
I'm Addie.
Addie, yeah.
So we're.
Thank you
we're-
for
we're-
being
so much.
our partner at South of Utah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're very excited.
Don't worry about going over whatever they go over. We have like a 30-minute break afterwards. So just
Oh,
do
yeah.
a regular time,
Okay.
and we'll just make up for it.
I did add one more slide
Okay.
to you, so, if you feel comfortable with it, then I can pull it up out of my email. But if it is not like, it's also a thing that I feel like, you can find all of this at this specific place on our website.
Feel free.
Okay, great. Maybe I'll try, and then if the wave of people are coming in, then, yeah.
Thank you. I wish I could sit.
So do you want me to advance the
Actually,
slides for
I think
you?
since people are coming in, I don't really necessarily wanna like open my email and dig into it. So I think we'll just roll with it.
Okay. Would you all like me to advance the slides for you from here, or do you want?
I can do that,
Okay.
yeah. If you all wanna do something? Sorry. There's a fun story with that piece of art. It was a commissioned piece.
Awesome.
And I will be happy to tell you about it.
Great. So we're advancing on that one.
Yeah, this is just for y'all
For us to be
to,
able to see.
yeah,
Okay.
so feel free to move it over there, cause I can look at this one and also.
No, I haven't.
Yeah.
I don't think I really
No.
Yeah, sometimes you see from a ferry.
unless you want to pick here and then I can.
Yeah.
Sure, you know what, actually, like,
Yeah,
visual
it-
cues are
sometimes
really
it- I
helpful
mean,
for me,
it
so I'm gonna
Okay.
say yes to
Yeah.
that.
Catch it down. There's a
Then
little
I'll
something
have like a
right
purpose.
everywhere, like right in the book.
You feel the
Right
buzz
down.
now?
Besides moral
Just
support, which
can you
is
imagine?
a great purpose.
Yeah.
Hopefully they build those a little more resilient.
I hope
Yes,
so.
yes, yes. I mean, it's got these jump
Okay.
out there. I mean, there is a bridge, but it's way up north by the Naval Air Station, and so I don't often get up that far. It's an hour.
So the rule is that you can take your mask off when you're speaking into the
stayed at like
microphone.
dissection
Yeah.
point,
Okay.
and you hear
Yes,
the planes
yes.
overhead all night long. But they don't
Yeah.
stop until like midnight, and then they start going at 4 a.m. At least when I went camping.
There's been a lot of, controversy. I don't know what's the latest on limiting that, but, yeah, I was working in
Hey,
the
Sam.
school district up there,
Oh.
and there are a lot of
Can you tell us,
kids.
with
A lot of
them-
it
Yeah, with them.
doesn't cost you to give happy coverage to people, more likely to big families.
Oh, lots of big families.
Yeah.
We can
And
kind of
remember
test
we
it.
Houses are expensive.
They
Big
get
houses.
You want to introduce yourselves? or do you want to-
And, they move every 2 years.
Oh, the military, that's what you're saying, military. Oh, yeah, because I'm a Navy brat,
Yeah,
so
you
I'm
are.
very familiar.
Yeah.
And I'm one of 4, so.
Yeah, right, I know, so it is.
Well, 'cause you get free healthcare,
Yes.
you get a housing stipend, you get.
All that.
Any order of introduction?
Yeah, so, the kids totally don't in
Yeah.
schools, they're like,
Wanna go first?
oh, let's dad up here.
That's
You know,
kind of
they-
our-
They look forward to the
I'm good with that.
plans, but the rest of us are like,
Excellent.
Cause I'll be teaching
How are
in
you?
class, and I gotta stop.
Yeah, if
And they
interest, we wanted to
take
do
pictures.
a little, land acknowledgement of where
That's
we
what
are
it is.
specifically
Because
from,
I remember when I went to the
and,
campground, there was a big sign,
situate
like,
ourselves a
stop
bit,
complaining.
and how we show
Oh,
people,
yeah.
and then be like,
We can't do anything about it.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
This is,
It's confusing
I
when the
was on
number
military
of the
base for
track.
a while growing up, I'm
Oh.
Sounds good?
Go.
Yeah. Well, I had access to the base for a while. We started a community garden project. And it was really fun.
You want to let me know when you're ready to
From
start.
all
I
over
don't,
the world.
I'm
The
assuming
country,
people
all over the
trickle
country.
in.
Well, some of them, because like,
Yeah,
all of
what
them
time is
are-
it?
like,
Yeah.
I have friends.
9:07.
Yeah, so it was
so maybe let's
interesting.
just start at
having,
9:05, so maybe,
You know,
like,
learning about our
3
local.
more minutes,
Yeah,
and
food
Start at
growing
9:10?
stuff, you know, country.
Well, because my experiences in the military is when I was with the, you don't make connections to places usually.
Right.
Because you're
You
moving so
really
much.
don't, I know.
So I wasn't connected at all to like
Yeah,
the
I know.
land at all.
Yeah, so I hope I got them a little bit connected to Pacific Northwest, because now Whidbey Island is like
just so
40%.
yeah, let's chat some more about
Okay.
that and
Really?
figure out like the right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
There,
big,
that's
not as
exciting.
much
I feel
being
you.
done at the
I
south.
Yeah.
know what you're saying.
No, they have their
I think I have a
stints.
similar.
And then they retire and work on
And they,
Yeah.
and they come back.
I mean, I like I also
Yeah.
know myself that I'm someone who
Yeah.
likes to be in the know, and like that helps. Like I feel most comfortable when I like have all the information.
So you're looking to start farming?
But I like to know things.
I've
and so,
been
like,
working on farms
you
the
know,
last
there's
few years, but I don't know if I'll like farm, like, I don't know if I'll, it's that line between being, like, working on farms and being
Yeah.
like a farmer, that
Yeah,
I'm like.
yeah.
So I've worked on farms the last few years, and I feel like I need to put in a little more time into that, where I'm like,
Well, it's good to be able to get paid for it.
but yes, it's very nice to get paid for it.
Yeah.
I really like the place that I work right now, because she's very,
Okay. Will that pick up all through the local?
color farm hybrid. She's very like open with knowledge, and she's always like explaining things to me. It's not everywhere. There are places where people are just like, do this, I'm not gonna tell you why. But she always wants to learn, and so I appreciate it. And I get to try. Which is very, I'm
Yeah.
sure, I don't know if you tried it.
Well, I do, my husband does it a bit, but we're
we don't have a lot of
glass
capacity.
terrace. So South Whidbey is very up and down. When the glacier dropped everything,
Is it time?
got left. So we're a lot of rock, and we're very up and down, so we
I'm gonna
have
take off the
terraces.
mask.
Yeah, you can.
And he can, if we need to, put up a terrace, we could, but mostly him do it well.
That's adorable.
So you're not telling them anything.
Teeny tiny.
No, I'm not chicken.
So yes,
no,
if you wanna
no,
pass this, it's like sticking
Yeah,
out.
I mean,
I have it.
I do
Yeah,
believe
it's
we're
voice that
structure
carries.
of soil and
Okay.
taking care of it,
Mhm.
so. We have a We have a 25 acre
All right,
porch.
I think we're gonna go ahead and get started.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you all for joining us, both those of you who are live in the room with us and those of, I'll do that in a second, and those of us who are joining us on streaming. Yeah, we're just super stoked to talk to all of you and are gonna start with some introductions and then a kind of like general overview of our projects and how we're involved, and then kind of dialing into what is happening here in Puget Sound region and is really relevant. So my name is Reese Torvald Hansen. I live on Coast Salish lands in the place now called Point Roberts. It's a summer salmon feasting ground of a number of Coast Salish nations. I am a artist and facilitator and worked in food systems for about a decade here in Puget Sound in a bunch of capacities, and now have the honor of working with Agrarian Trust, the national organization, as part of their communications team, and then also as the staff support for our efforts out here in Puget Sound.
Good morning. My name's Addie Candide, and I live on.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we might want to do this again. Gwen just let me know that there's still stuff going on at the breakfast.
We're running late.
And
Oh,
we're
okay.
running late.
Actually, I guess that didn't get communicated down here.
So, no, I didn't know
I think
that.
we're,
So it's not-
so sorry.
So I guess
Sure.
we
But
should
the
probably wait
online-
for more
oh, there you
people.
go.
So we
Oh.
go back to
And
live stream
then
bus?
and then we'll go until 10:30.
Okay.
Ish.
Yeah, hi.
Alright.
Sorry about that.
Never mind.
Yeah.
Take back my introduction, but not the warm welcome.
Folks on live stream, hang tight. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
Sorry, I think I maybe take a moment to set that so it doesn't like close out quite so quickly.
I might touch it every 30 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that how you know them? Because I haven't
Yep.
heard of this organization before.
Yeah, that's on there. And so they're taking applications for people to farm these 10 acres.
Oh, is it like an incubator type of situation? Oh,
Well, I don't know.
I guess
Okay.
we do.
I think I just said it, so.
I guess we can just
Quite
keep
get
going.
the whole.
Rolling. You're gonna have people coming in.
But we have,
Yeah. So I apologize. We're running like 15 minutes late upstairs.
Okay.
So you'll have people coming in partway through.
yeah, so till.
I'll leave that up to you all,
Well, it is still
whenever you want to, however you want to.
But there were.
You can wait a few more minutes.
And ours on South Dixie got property 25 years ago. Most folks don't, most are just, but, you know, but, so we go
I
to
thought it was
the
starting at 8.
and doing,
So I thought
incubator,
it was
farmer incubator programs and big community garden. So it's nice. And then the farmers
15
market.
minutes late, it will be stuff.
So is this a community education? That they have land?
2-minute warning, friends at home.
That's
Go get
exciting.
your beverage and good coffee.
So
All
that's why,
contiguous.
yeah, that's why I'm really interested in who they choose and if they do that. Yeah, so I have a Zoom class that I do both Wednesday and to work with food growers on that and with, I don't know, tips on crops, pest management, season extension, weed management, seed and whatever. all
Do you
that
like
stuff.
make presentations or is it just lots of
I just do like a 10-minute talk, and then everybody, so hands out, what do I do about my corn this year at winter? And like, you know, so it's kind of fun. I don't. So yeah.
I'm just somebody that sells on Sundays, so that's what I do.
Oh, just till 2004, I guess we finally started. Yeah. I was in Seattle before that, though, and I worked for Seattle, what was called Seattle Health.
You would be amazed how many
I
people
worked
told
for
me about
Seattle
this
Health.
This is one of the best ones in
Seattle
my
Food
area.
Hedge Program, Hawaiian
In
Extension.
Seattle area.
Yeah. It used to be big in Seattle. I think it still is, but.
That's where people can set up their own community garden.
Yeah, well, the city
Yeah.
owned, yeah, most of them are city owned, but, some are leased from private people that have, gardening to have.
Just make sure they're once I think they opened, was gonna send like an email preview or whatever, on Slack.
Yeah.
Communicate.
Yeah.
Looks like we're all.
It took a little education.
Yeah, same.
You know, help us get there. So that was a lot of fun.
One of the biggest
But now we
things that I have gotten into with my partner is when he lent out my autographed copy of one of his books without asking me.
Oh. Okay, are we at 9:15?
I think we're good.
Okay.
Okay.
Again.
Again, great. So, yeah, welcome to Agricultural Commenting, Rethinking Farmland Access in Washington State. And yeah, welcome to the folks who are in the room and people joining from home. Really excited to have you join us. We're going to spend a little bit of time introducing ourselves and then talking about the Agrarian Trust, Agrarian Commons project as a whole and how to like sort of situate and explain it, and then talk about what that is looking like here locally in Puget Sound and some really exciting opportunities that we want to make sure to share out. So, as I said, I'm Reese Torval Hinson. I use they, them pronouns, and I am an artist and facilitator. I live on Coast Salish lands shared by a number of different nations in the place now called Point Roberts. I come to this as an artist and facilitator and community organizer, having worked in food systems in a bunch of different capacities here in Puget Sound for about a decade. And I'm here with Agrarian Trust. I'm part of their communications team and also help sort of lead and support the organizing efforts out here in the Puget Sound region.
Try this again. Good morning. My name is Addie Candide, and I live on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish Nooksack-Amami people, also known as Bellingham, Washington. I am a farmer, and longtime food systems advocate. Have the privilege of serving on the board of the Puget Sound Agrarian Commons. And when I'm not involved in the Commons, my day job is that I work as the regional director for American Farmland Trust. I have served on the TILF board for several years, and I met my partner at a TILF conference. So it's really nice to be back here in this community and excited to share with you today.
Hi everyone, I'm Thea Maria Carlson. I am an earth steward, farmer, facilitator, and also a member of the Agrarian Trust team very recently. I live on Waco land in what's now known as Northern California. And I wasn't originally part of this workshop, but I was coming to the conference anyway, and then I joined the Agrarian Trust team as the new Commons Alliance facilitator. So I'll be contributing a little bit to this workshop as the new addition.
Great. Well, we didn't want to spend the whole time talking at you, so we're going to kick it off with inviting, with a little bit of like interaction, and I'll kick it over to Thea to lead that.
Yeah. So we have a couple of questions for you to think about and talk about, ideally with someone you don't know yet. So the questions are, would you describe farmland as being at a moment of crisis, and why or why not? And talk about what you're noticing that might lead you to believe that farmland is in a crisis or isn't. So we'll have about 5 minutes, so 2.5 minutes per person. So find somebody that you haven't talked to yet. I'll ring a bell when it's time to switch people, and then again when it's time to come back, and then we'll hear from a few people.
Especially in this area, so high that it's so can you afford? No, absolutely. like everyone I know is like getting, maybe it's been like this for a while, but everyone I know is getting farmland, is getting
Welcome y'all. We're just giving persons a few minutes to discuss themselves whether they think farmland is in a moment of crisis, and if so or if not, what your reasons are.
Well, and even in the valley that I work in, because the valley is like especially Seattle, like a lot more woodworking. There's a lot of farmland is just developed over the last year. So much work doing that, growing compost.
Welcome to the folks who are just joining. We are discussing in pairs whether you think farmland is at a point of crisis and why or why not. And for the folks who are in pairs, time to switch partners if you haven't yet.
So, as I'm getting
And then it's also like, are you going to be able to sell something well, because it's your land and a land trust?
No.
Because I know some of them, like, I've worked on farms that were part of the municipal trust. I've worked on a farm that's part of the small.
Hi, welcome folks that are just coming in. We're just doing a little bit of discussion and we'll come back in a second.
All right, so welcome to the folks who are just joining. It's great to see the room filling up. So those who've been here since the beginning have been talking with each other about whether they feel that farmland is at a point of crisis and why or why not. So we'd love to hear from folks, whether you just had a conversation or you just walked in and you want to share something. Please raise your hand if you want to share something you noticed about the state of farmland right now. In the back, please.
So our farmland is being degraded, the soil's being degraded all the time. We've had about 150 years max over here that we've degraded our soils, and really that's influencing all of the agricultural practices because of that. I mean, you look at other countries and their soils have been degraded for thousands of years, but that's why you see the collapse of civilization, and we're actually heading that way in a shorter amount of time because of the practices that we use here in the United States.
Great, so I'm going to repeat just the essence of things that people say for the folks who are listening on the live stream so they can hear it. So that comment was about the degradation of soil and how civilizations have crumbled because they've lost their soil and we're heading in that direction. There was someone else a little bit further forward who wanted to say something? Yes, go ahead.
So that was, as a soil scientist, that was a great one, so I second that. And then we talked about some other things, just increase in housing. So our farm is 360 surrounded by housing, and we are now rezoned for housing. So it's only a matter of time that we may be next. And then the cost is really high for farmland. So if we have new generations coming in and they want to buy a farm, can they even afford it? If they inherit it, can they afford it in the long run?
Thank you. Yeah, so two key points there. One is all the housing that's being built and rezoning of agricultural land for housing, which threatens the viability, and also the cost of land is really skyrocketing. Other folks want to share things that you've noticed about the current state of farmland? All right, well.
Great. Anybody else? Anybody else feeling weird for like being in a room presenting
Yes.
again for like the first
Yes.
time? Like, let's just acknowledge that it's awkward. We're gonna be awkward. You be awkward. It's great. We're all here. We're doing this together. Obviously, we had a bias coming in with this question, but we were really excited actually to hear sort of like what was sticking out to you, because there are so many different points of crisis, and we're all feeling that like sort of differently depending on our relationships and engagement with the larger food system. But before I kind of dive into agrarian trust as a whole, I'm going to give you some like really fun, depressing facts to sort of situate like the work and what we're trying to respond to. So like one that we keep coming to all the time is that we are going to have in the United States 400 million acres transition hands between generations and between different people in the next 20 years, and that for every farmer under the age of 25, there are 5 farmers above the age of 75. We're looking at an enormous increase in land prices, rising up over 400% in 15 years in some areas. Farmland ownership is continuing to consolidate and going into the hands of fewer and fewer people. There are 37 mid-sized farms a day that closed between 2012 and 2017. And farmers have among the highest suicide rates of any professions. And we're really in this point where our farmers and the folks that are feeding us are in a point of crisis, being put in a position where they're disconnected from the communities that they're feeding, disconnected from the land, disconnected from the support systems that they need to be successful and take care of themselves and the soil. So that's part of what we're trying to look at, and a model, like we're trying to come with a couple of models of how we can begin to address that. So Agrarian Trust our vision is that we're a nationally supported, community-held land and agrarian, I feel like I put a typo in that, so sorry everybody. Nationally supported, community-led land and agrarian property. We support sustainable food production, ecological stewardship, community vitality, and equitable land access for the next generation of farmers and ranchers. What this means is that we are trying to create this sort of community-led projects that are holding farmland for regenerative and sustainable production in a bunch of different ways, in a bunch of different places. And before we kind of dive into kind of the nitty-gritty and what that works and how the different relationship is, I think it's really important for us to be transparent and position ourselves, because we can't separate land ownership and land control from the histories of racism and white supremacy in this culture. And so to address one of them meaningfully is to address the other. And we're a primarily white organization. We work in partnership with a lot of BIPOC organizations, but we ourselves are not at this point. And I also want to bring it up because on a personal level, I'm really excited about this model because I think it's a really great way for white folks to show up and look at the history in this country, look at what we have benefited from, and match resources that we have and opportunities that we have, make those available to more people, and then get out of the way of the really important projects that are happening that are led by Black folks, Indigenous folks, and other racialized people, and people who've experienced land theft and displacement. And again, with all of those really light topics right at the beginning, now we're going to talk about like, here's some of the solutions that we're looking at. Oh, I realized I skipped a slide here too. Again, in person. So, what does this look like? We at Agrarian Trust are innovating land ownership and access. We're trying to transform people's relationships with the land, particularly looking at whether land as private property, whether that relationship is really a model that is serving our communities and serving our people. We're sort of looking at building larger stakeholder networks to do this work collaboratively and alongside other people. And we think that racial and gender equity is an integral part of our fights for environmental, climate, and land justice. Now I can turn it over to Addie.
Quick show of hands, folks familiar with land trusts in your community? Okay, lots of people have some familiarity. So basically two kinds of land trusts. One kind of land trusts are conservation land trusts that really exist to protect largely habitat, wildlife, riparian areas. The other kind of land trust is really more the community land trust model, and those largely operate in a housing space. There are a few land trusts around the country that apply a community land trust model to agriculture. But something I didn't know until this morning was that there really is no national umbrella to provide support and networking to those community land trusts. Agrarian Trust and Agrarian Commons is a really unique project because we are bringing a land trust model and a community land trust model specifically to agriculture and to agricultural land. And the commons are essentially community land trusts that exist to hold agricultural land in trust for the community to provide secure, affordable land tenure. And the Agrarian Trust is providing the overarching network of support and resources and networking. We currently have 13 commons projects around the country. This map shows you the size of the bubble kind of indicates the territory or geography served by each commons. It's not necessarily a reflection of the amount of land held in the commons yet. And the geography served by each commons is determined by the board of each commons. So again, the commons are these community-owned and self-governed organizations that really exist to hold land and to convey affordable, equitable leases to farmers. The Agrarian Trust is the overarching umbrella organization that is providing the kind of the thread that ties all of those commons together. And I think with that, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Yeah, and we're gonna have throughout this like a bunch of really cool, slightly too detailed for you to read at this time graphics, but they're all on our website and really encourage you check it out. And I'm also happy to share the presentation with anybody later if you want. So to sort of Addie's point, what makes this model different from other land trusts? And the answer is some things are pretty different and some things are really the same. We have a lot of overlap, but some of the, sorry, I keep right clicking this, there we go. So some of the major differences is kind of like our mission scope being centered around agriculture. Our legal structure is kind of unique as far as these local boards that are holding property, but then are sort of also part of this larger organization. One of the unique pieces that makes me the most excited is governance. All of our commons projects are co-governed by the farmers who hold leases. We think it's really important to not create, as much as possible, that landowner, land leaser power dynamic. We think that that causes a lot of problems. So when a farmer joins the commons and is taking on the lease of a commons property, they become equal board members with the rest of the board so they can help determine the future of it. That kind of ties in with sort of the ownership, access, and equity. It's a community board that holds the title to property, not a private landowner who's making it available. And then we also require we use regenerative and sustainable ag as kind of the key framework. Different boards interpret that differently, like recognizing that those are kind of vague terms and people understand them, but what we're ultimately looking for is for people to engage in a type of agriculture that is not extractive, but in relationship with the soil and with all the living systems that keep the soil healthy and the people healthy around it.
I just want to acknowledge that for me, when Ian McSweeney, who's the executive director of Agrarian Trust, called me up and asked me if I wanted to be on the board of the new Puget Sound Agrarian Commons, and he told me about the model, I got super excited because I happen to think that 501c2 governance is super cool. For many of you in this room, I want to acknowledge that that may not be what makes you most excited about this conversation, and just want to name that we tend to talk early in the conversation about the wonky and legal pieces of this, and that isn't always super accessible to people. But it's important that we name it and we talk about it because the legal structure is such a departure from the norm of how we typically are able to access land and help people get on land. So feel free to let your eyes glaze over if that's what's best for you right now. We'll come back to the fun stuff in a minute. So most of our commons are 501c2 organizations. We have one common that is organized as a 501c25. The difference is that whereas Agrarian Trust is organized as a 501c3 nonprofit, which means it can do programming and education and fundraising and apply for grants, the 501c2s exist exclusively for the purpose of holding land and, as I said earlier, conveying those affordable and equitable leases. The Commons boards are comprised of 1/3 farmer leaseholders, 1/3 community members, and then 1/3 representatives from Agrarian Trust. And so this project is about getting farmers on land in a way that is affordable and sustainable, but it's also about giving those farmers an opportunity to be involved in the governance and decision making about the long-term future of that land and who gets to farm it. And again, you can, if you want to dive into the particular differences between these two models, you can look at this infographic more closely on our website. So next, I want to talk about some of the underlying values that are driving this work. And we really think about the Commons model as contributing to equity in 3 key ways. The private property model, which is a dominant model in our system, really centers financial equity, often at the expense of other kinds. Whereas the Commons model values not just financial equity, but land equity and equity for humans and communities. So when we talk about land equity, we're talking about centering people who have historically been marginalized from land access, food, and health, as well as communities and land who have been subject to exploitation. So that's land equity. The human and community equity component is really about, again, this idea that land should be held not as private property, but as an asset for the community, that the Commons Board and farmers are working together to steward for ecological health, for food for the community, and for other possibilities yet to be determined. And then lastly, there is that financial equity piece. This means for the Commons that farmers, again, have that secure and affordable land access and are at the same time building financial equity through their investments in the land and through that lease agreement. Meanwhile, the real estate is off the market, which means that it's not subject to speculation, and banks aren't profiting through holding mortgage loans. So I think we present all 3 of those because we want to call out that no one of those is more important than the other, that we really think of them as an integrated piece that are driving all of this work. And then the last thing that I'm going to talk about for now is just to give you an example of a really successful project we're excited about is our Little Juba Central Maine Agrarian Commons project and Liberation Farms, which is a project that involves the Somali Bantu community in Maine. Family farmers are working together to access land, seeds, technical assistance, and every farmer in that commons stewards 1/10 of an acre to grow food for themselves and their families. And some of them are growing commercially, whereas some are kind of farming more in a subsistence way. One thing that I wanted, before Reese wanted me to mention, is that the Somali Bantu Community Association, which is the leaseholder on the Commons, recently were the winners of the 2020 USFSA Food Sovereignty Prize. So the Commons wasn't the recipient of that award, but we were sort of named as a contributor to the success of that project.
Yeah, and so part of the reason that we are really excited about like this particular project is this, like I said, this model is showing up really differently in a number of different communities, and we thought that this was a really great example of like meeting our model with kind of like the unique needs of a refugee community that wouldn't be looking to like have, you know, one family own a large amount of land and farm, but sort of like coming in with this community approach. And looking at the collective well-being of all of those folks in the way that they're approaching agriculture while still making individual contribution an important part of it. We just got permission this morning, so we don't have a slide for it yet, but we are really excited also that we are also now working with a project on the East Coast that is adjacent to the Eastern Woodlands Rematriation Project. We're working with a collection of Indigenous women and Two-Spirit folks to return 65 acres of land into traditional food production and to support Native sovereignty. This one, aside from our like shared commitment around land back and the return of land to sovereign nations, is really important to us because for a lot of Native folks, the word agriculture can be one that's associated with a history of trauma and residential schools. And so there's been a really beautiful bit of this partnership around like challenging the use of the word agriculture in the Commons and challenging some of the framing of like what is agricultural production. And so again, like through this, as we're working together, we're finding ways of like, again, how can we remix these legal structures to really fit the needs of that community as opposed to putting a top-down model and saying like this is how you apply it. I just want to call out a couple more things before we dive in and talk about like, okay, what's happening in Puget Sound and like what's the real opportunity. And I apologize for not having a slide for this, but on our website at Agrarian Trust, we have a bunch of really cool free resources that I wanted to make you all available. There is a PDF guide to creating an agrarian commons. We're really committed to a pretty like open source reciprocal sharing. So like we want to pass out the like legal toolkits and frameworks for how to do this. We don't feel like we have all of the answers. We're super stoked to partner with people, but if people want to do their own commons project, we want to give you as much knowledge as we can to do that for yourselves. We also have worked with the Sustainable Economies Law Center, and there are these bite-sized legal guides. So there's guides to setting up cooperative farms, sort of financing, all these kind of different bits where if you don't want to dive into a huge document, you can kind of take a little snack there, see if it's worth more investigation. We also have a Faithlands toolkit, which is another initiative of Agrarian Trust, and that is particularly supporting churches and other religious communities who hold land and making those lands available to agricultural projects and commons type projects. These can all be found on our website if you go and click Commons, Commons Alliance/learning. You can find it right in the top menu. And again, if any of you have a hard time finding any of these things, my contact is going to be at the end, or you can talk to me now and I can email them to you. But yeah, we're super stoked about that. I share that also because we're growing really quickly and our capacity to like engage with people one-on-one is a little low at the moment. So we're doing a lot of like, here's the framework, get started, and like we look forward to circling back with each other as we grow. Also because we know that we're going to learn from other people taking this and applying it in their community, and that's great because this is an iterative project and it's going to continue to evolve.
You said that the website was Commons Alliance?
Here. The overall website is agrariantrust.org.
Okay.
And so on there's Commons Alliance. And so the Commons Alliance is what I and my colleague Joe Rosen just got hired to create. So it doesn't quite exist yet, but there's a page for it. So what we're planning to launch sometime in 2022 is an alliance of all these commons plus other organizations and groups that are interested in this kind of land stewardship. And so that will be a network for learning and sharing together. So you can sign up to find out when we launch that network also on the website. agrariantrust.org is where you can find it all.
Thanks, Thea. We realize you all may have some questions at this point, and we are going to start diving into kind of the local projects, so just ask you to hang on to your questions at the end, and we have given 15 minutes at the end to sort of talk all of that through. So yeah, so locally here we have the Puget Sound Agrarian Commons. The Puget Sound Agrarian Commons, which started with a 10-acre land gift from Carolyn Gardner on Whidbey Island. I didn't have the chance to meet her, but the basic story is that she, living on Whidbey Island, was really concerned about the food sovereignty of her community. She was really concerned at the development pressure that was happening and was aware of how vulnerable, particularly island communities, are to this kind of trucking-based food system that we live in these days. And so she felt moved by that, and so she gifted this 10-acre farm to the Commons. It was our first land gift to the Agrarian Trust. So it has a pretty special place in the national organization's heart, that it not just helped seed our Puget Sound Commons, but really helped launch this Agrarian Trust movement around the country. And we've subsequently had several other land gifts, partly inspired by this opportunity. So in this illustration here, you can kind of see about where that little seed that's cracking open, that's about where the Commons is located. And now we're just starting the process of looking for a leasehold farmer for this 10-acre property. So Addie is going to tell you some of the more of the details about it.
So as Reese mentioned, this is a 10-acre parcel of land on South Whidbey Island. About 3.5 acres of tillable land, 1.5 acres in a brand new orchard that was just planted this past season. About 1.15 acres in pretty degraded Camas Prairie, but there's some really exciting opportunities for restoration of that native habitat. And for folks who aren't familiar with Whidbey Island, there are some great resources in that community to support that restoration. The Land Trust there and the Conservation District have been really involved in helping to do restoration in other parts of the island, so there's some great resources. It's been used for hay since 2010, and currently there is no infrastructure on the property. We do, as a trust, have about $30,000 in funds set aside to be invested, and our plan has been to install a driveway and a well, and to do that, we'd like to do that in partnership with a leasehold farmer to ensure that our infrastructure developments are going to really be designed around their needs. So this is an overview map of the parcel of land. You can see the big sort of chunk on the that side. My screen is reversed. Is the tillable area, and then the orchard is in the back. It's kind of a long, skinny piece of land. And we're really fortunate that it borders on the land that is stewarded by South Whidbey Till. And thanks for being here today. So there are, we have excellent partners, and South Whidbey Till has really generously made their restrooms and water available sort of in the short term, so that we can host people on the land and sort of get things up and running in the very short term.
I think the other thing I would add to that too is that there isn't a house on the property now, but there is a house site available, and we are open to and excited that if the leaseholder wants to build permanent housing on there, either by themselves to build the financial equity themselves, or in partnership with the Commons and then shared equity. The possibilities are really open, and that's part of why we're holding these funds until we have that leaseholder, so we can figure out what the most appropriate path forward is.
Thank you. And for folks who aren't familiar, in a typical community land trust model, the way it would work is that the farmer leases the land, typically with a 99-year lease. So, and that lease is heritable by subsequent generations of that farming family or farming constellation. But then the farmer owns the buildings that are on that land, and that's a way for them to build equity while not needing to be able to afford the land under the buildings. So that is a route that we can go, but we're not locked into that model. I think recognizing that with this piece in particular, it may not be financially feasible for a farmer to move on here and build themselves a home. So there may be opportunity to co-invest, and we're really open to that. So I love this graphic that Reese put together. We are seeking a long-term relationship with a farmer or farmers to steward this land. And some sort of basic parameters is that the leaseholder will be invited and expected to join the commons board and help to govern not just this piece of property, but subsequent properties that are brought into the commons. We are aiming for a 99-year lease because we really want this to be a long-term, secure land tenure situation. We also recognize that 99 years is a big commitment for someone who's like just beginning started in ag, so I think we're willing to negotiate. And the rate on the financial cost of that lease is also negotiable, recognizing the value of sweat equity. And with this particular property and the lack of infrastructure, there's going to be a need for significant sweat equity up front. We're looking for someone who will be farming using ecologically sustainable and or organic farming practices. And again, as we mentioned, there's the opportunity for joint investment in infrastructure that's shared between the leaseholder and the commons. And I think the last thing I would just say is, I think we're not requiring someone who is going to come in and farm this land for market purposes. So we're open to a farming model that is more about subsistence or feeding the community. You see that's accurate?
Yeah. Like to us, the core of the thing that is important is that you are engaged in the community, that you're providing food for that. In some commons that has looked like a CSA to serve the community. Some commons that has looked like teaching opportunities on the farm, or kind of sharing different things. The other piece that I want to call out that I think is important is like when we say negotiable, we don't mean like negotiate your salary kind of negotiation. Like we really want folks to come in with like, what do you need to be successful? And so we've put out like on our website, like we're totally open to like your lease payment for the first couple years is just your investment in the soil, and then you graduate up to a cash payment. What we're looking for is a true like self-assessment of like your capacities, what you will realistically be able to do, and what kind of support that you'll need potentially from us to be successful. And so we really want to come into that negotiation as equal partners, and not to sort of like like make us your highest offer.
Thanks.
Good question. What is sweat equity?
Oh, great question. Sweat equity is used to mean the value of the work that you would put in. So it's a way that if you were to come and spend 200 hours building a fence on this piece of property, a sort of long-term investment in the property, that labor has value, and that labor can be used in exchange for, or instead of exchanging cash. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Really trying to put value on your literal sweat. Great question. So in terms of what we are looking for in a leaseholder and partner in this project, we're looking for someone or someones with at least 2 years of farm management experience. And I do think this is important to identify. This is not an incubator farm. This is not a farmer training program. This isn't work, so the Commons board is not currently comprised of farmers, and we're not in a position to sort of help someone figure out how to farm. So we really are looking for someone who comes in with some knowledge and experience and is really ready to be self-directed. I think as a board, we want to provide a lot of support and networking and connections to resources and community, but as board members, we're not in a position to sort of teach someone how to farm. This person or persons need to be able to access and maintain liability insurance. We hope that they have intentions to grow food for a broader community, whether that's in a transactional or more kind of sustaining way. We are hoping that we will find folks who are interested and willing to represent the Commons model to the larger community, to sort of do what we are doing today, and to be able to go out and talk about this work and get other people excited and engaged in it. We're looking for a commitment to building relationships with local indigenous communities and stewarding the land in a way that is respectful of that legacy. And lastly, being committed to a reciprocal, regenerative, and restorative relationship with the land. So those are the primary criteria. There's a lot more information in the official RFP on our website, and our applications are open right now. So we're inviting people who are interested to submit a farm plan, a detailed resume, some professional references, and a cover letter. It could be written or it could be in a video format, sort of explaining who you are and why you're interested in being part of this model and what you would bring to the table. And applications will be reviewed on a monthly, be reviewed monthly on a rolling basis starting in early December of 2021. So if you're walking away and you're feeling really excited about this, we encourage you to submit an application sooner rather than later. And of course, we're happy to help flesh out or add information that will give you greater clarity leaving the room today.
And I'll add on to that we're taking applications, and I'm the one that takes a look at them first, and I'm looking at them to see, like, do we have all the information we need? Also, again, like, trying to be transparent. If I think that something is missing or that we need like more information to make an informed decision, I'm letting the application folks like know that, so they have a chance to come back to it. I'm also available to like meet and answer questions, so that you can come in, if you have specific things that you need to know about the land or like to talk through an idea and whether it's viable. I can't pretend to have all the answers, but I'm happy to like share whatever I can. And we are not judging these applications on your spelling ability or able to like your ability to communicate in writing or like some of these other kind of like business things. Like, we just want to get an idea of who you are and whether your project aligns with our value and mission, and whether you have a viable plan that that could potentially work here. But whatever we can do to make information available and to make this, we really see this as more of like the beginning of a relationship than a kind of like sifting out process. And we're really excited to not just find the leaseholder for this land, but to sort of like start building relationships with other people and organizations who are seeking land. With other commons projects, sometimes we get the land first and look for the farmer, and sometimes we meet the farmer or organization and like really jive with them and then work together to look for the land. So I think there's real opportunity, even though there's only this one farm, we can only give it to one folks, for there to be like an immediate pipeline to sort of like, we really like each other, let's find the place, the piece of land for you so that we can keep growing.
Just to add to that, I think the Agrarian Trust has a really fantastic track record of already successfully fundraising to purchase land to bring into the commons to make available to a specific group of partners. So we haven't done it yet here in this region, but have that knowledge and capacity within the greater trust network.
And I had like the little kind of short key up here, but if you're just going to our website, if you visit the Puget Sound Agrarian Commons page, you'll find a link to like a really long, detailed document that has this, that also has a more detailed sort of like survey of the land and kind of the restoration work and a bunch of other details, as well as an example of the equitable lease template. So you can take a look at sort of like what would be the tool that we would use to come into an equal lease relationship, and that template is like available. So again, like one of those resources that you're welcome to use and encourage you to apply elsewhere.
All right, so now we have time for questions and discussion. So if you have a question or a comment, raise your hand. I'll call on you, and then just try to keep it short enough that I can repeat it into the microphone so the folks who are listening in know what we're talking about. Yes, go ahead.
The bad question. What happens if you're X years into it and it falls apart?
So the question is, what happens if you're some number of years into it and it falls apart?
Can I ask a clarifying, like the farmers project falls apart, the board falls apart?
The farmers project falls apart. Divorce happens. Physical health, personal crisis. I can't do this anymore. What happens then?
Well, I can only speak sort of speculatively and our intention, but certainly we don't want to like hold anybody's feet to the fire on a lease. And so if somebody's not in a position to continue it, and we are not able to, as a board, provide the resources and support to like help folks get back on track in the way they want to, then we would release them from the lease and find a way to make sure that they are receiving whatever financial equity is appropriate for departing for the work and infrastructure that they've put in.
And I think part of why personally I believe so much in this model is because with the current model that we have, when there's a divorce or a death or a crisis where you just get tired and you don't have a retirement, the option that we have is to sell the land. And so what this does is it provides a backstop. So there's an option for the farmer to exit the operation and for a new farmer to be identified without the vulnerability of that land going up for sale on the open market.
Yeah, the other aspect of the commons model, I mean, all of these commons were launched, within the last less than 2 years, so we're figuring it out as we go. But one of the things that's core to the model is that it's not just one farm in a commons. The ideal is to have between 4 and 12 farms in a commons, so that it's not just, everything rests on this one farmer, that there are other farmers who can kind of potentially pick up the slack if a farm, it doesn't have a farmer for a little while. So the idea is that it's a collective, cooperative, and there's resilience in that as well, rather than it just being focused on one farmer or farm family or whatever.
We're also excited like with the potential for like shared tools and resources. So if it like makes sense geographically to share like tractors or sort of like these other like processing equipment, like that's some of the other opportunities.
So over here and then over here.
So I live in Jefferson County out on the peninsula, and we recently had a farm go into the land trust that they put out an RFP, they reduced the price, they bought some land rights, and it seemed like this really amazing opportunity up front. And then what ended up happening was there were these kind of local groups and then national groups that, were all kind of conspiring to submit an RFP, and nobody kind of knew who was doing it, and the organization wasn't committed to matchmaking, and ultimately the land was, $500,000 and needed more than that in repair just to get up and running, right? So in the end, it was very complicated, and currently there's now a call to action to just give the land back to the native people who are whose land it is. And so I guess just to say, like, one, are you doing any work to matchmake or kind of connect people in ways that would be synergistic so that there's less of a competition for this like one golden opportunity, which is so beautiful, and also to what is the conversation like with the native people whose land it is, that there was a mention of like how commitment to working with them, but has that been a conversation, is that a conversation as part and parcel of like identifying pieces of land and figuring out what the most appropriate way to use them is in each of your sites.
So I'm
Big
try
questions.
to repeat
Sorry.
a little bit of that.
Hopefully I was
for the
projecting
live
enough
stream.
so people can hear, but yeah.
Yeah, but generally this idea of another situation where there was a piece of land and all these people wanted it, and then it was like too expensive to really be viable, and so there's a question around that of like people competing for one piece of land, and then also a question around relationships with indigenous communities on land return.
Yeah, I'm gonna attempt to like chew off bits of that and also be really transparent that there's lots of room for us to improve like in all of this. So to talk about the first part, so part of our application like and review process is we're gonna invite folks to do like a walkout on the land and kind of do that together and be in community. So we do hope there's some cross-pollination in that. While this particular piece of farmland is like the one golden opportunity, this is only the first piece of land in this commons, and while we don't have anything for secure, there's already like several very viable opportunities that are kind of in the pipeline. So I don't think we're like looking at like multi-year gaps between like when the next thing is going to be available, in the recognition that sort of land projects work on a different timeline than like all of us does. As far as engaging with indigenous folks, I think there's a couple different things to come in with that. As soon as we took leasehold of the land, we started contributing to Real Rent Jawamish and have engaged in that. I think there's still a lot more opportunity to deepen relationships. Some of it has been challenged by folks that we know and have existing relationships with have been hit really hard by COVID, and so there's been questions of capacity and wanting to be respectful of where people's energy is at. But we do have models and frameworks for cultural easement access, so making opportunities for gathering of traditional foods or sort of planting and stewarding those plants in relationship, but on the commons farmland and like in adjacent to the work that is happening or in partnership, and we're really into that. And sort of moving that forward. And, you know, I think if folks came forward and said, like, this is our land and we feel really challenged by that, certainly that's not something that we've, like, planned for or, like, great, but we would be open to it and be open to having a conversation and figuring out a way because, you know, I can't speak for every single person in the Commons, but we really do hold that as a core. And if there was a group, like, ready and wanting to come in, we want to match that and meet that and recognize you know, our participation in this extractive system and the opportunities that we have to offer repair and make space for it. Does that help answer?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, a couple other things I wanted to mention is like we're not trying to have like every piece of farmland in the whole United States go into a commons. Like it's only one solution, like giving the land back. If that's what people want to do, great, like go for it. And even with the commons model, you know, back to what Addie was talking about with the 501c2 versus the C25, most of the commons we have now are C2s, and that's a subsidiary of just one nonprofit, which is agrarian trust, but the C25s can have multiple nonprofits that are kind of parents of it. And so one of the things we're hoping to move towards with new commons is having multiple parents, including like BIPOC-led organizations that could eventually, when they have the capacity, become the primary parent. So agrarian trust is kind of there to steward the transition until folks are ready to be the primary folks who have stewardship of the land. And so this is not the be all end all. It's a model that we feel like is filling a gap now, and it's going to evolve, and there's a bunch of other things that people will come up with after hearing about this and be like, what if we did it this way? So that's another way to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, we had like when we had our RFP process, like one of our review partners pointed out that like we haven't figured out how this model like ultimately leads to Black land ownership in the form of reparations. It doesn't ultimately account for land back. We're chewing on that. That's thoughtful feedback. Like we want to come to it. And like for me personally, as much as I'm excited about this model, I recognize that like this model is not land justice, but what I think it does is help advance us and build the skills and capacity to think about land and relationships in a way that then moves us to greater possibilities of land justice. Like we have to scaffold ourselves from this private property model to a different model, and there's going to be iterations in the in-between, and for me personally, that's what I feel like this is.
Okay, over here and then over here.
The C2 status, do you guys know, how does that impact a common's ability to go out and get grant funds or other financial support?
So we,
So the questions around the C2 status and how that affects the commons ability to go out and seek grant funds or other support.
So as a C2, we cannot fundraise and seek grants, but that's why that partnership with the Agrarian Trust is so important. So if we, let's say we were partnering with a farmer and we found a piece of land that we wanted to fundraise to purchase to bring into the commons, Agrarian Trust would run a fundraiser on behalf of the commons. Agrarian Trust has applied for grants to do work in the region, and that's in part why it's so important that we have that sort of 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 model of the board, where the Agrarian Trust staff members are really integrated in with the operations of the commons for right now.
And is that still true of like grant funding through NRCS or something that a classic for-profit farm would be eligible for, which is not related to a nonprofit status?
If we were, if you were talking about equip and sort of cost share funding to do habitat restoration projects, typically it is the farmer who runs the farm business who would apply for that funding. And I think in order to qualify, they have to be able to demonstrate a secure lease, and so the commons would support the farmer in providing that documentation, but it would be the farmer who would have that relationship with NRCS.
Yeah, so a key thing with a C2 is it can't exist all by itself. It has to be a subsidiary of a C3 nonprofit. So whether that's Agrarian Trust or another nonprofit, it's really just this very limited scope that's in the support of the mission and all the other stuff that you have to do to be a 501c3 nonprofit.
That's like what like the core national team, like that's kind of like our focus in Special Magic is kind of like cultivating the stories of these particular places and then leading these community fundraisers. And so that's been the primary model so far for bringing farmland in. I mean, it has been a mix, but the largest category is sort of like individual donations, and it's lovely because you'll get donations, a monthly contribution of $1 to like help with these things, but then also, really large private donations. And building this kind of compelling national base. And it's really beautiful to watch folks who are part of a commons out in Maine or part of a commons out in Massachusetts, and we'll say, hey, we're launching a new commons in Virginia, or we're launching this new project in Montana, and they're like, because I see what this is doing in my community, I want to donate to help it happen there, and that's happening, and it makes me feel good about the world.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see how many people have contributed to these like crowdfunding campaigns to, like, for instance, buy that land in Maine that Addie was talking about. And that doesn't mean that we have the capacity to raise money to buy every piece of farmland that comes on the market. And so there's a really important evaluation process that, there's all sorts of, as this model's out there's all sorts of like every day, like, oh, what about this place? People are contacting us, and it's like really going through a rigorous evaluation process. Like, do we have the capacity, or does the local community have the capacity to raise the money to purchase this land in the time window that whoever wants to sell it as, or, is there someone who wants to just give their land into the commons, which means that we can raise money to do the infrastructure and other things that are needed once you already have the land. So it's a complex question to figure out how to do that. The question over here.
I had a question about, are you, or in your thinking about the future, thinking about working with farmers who already own the land that want to put the land into the commons but continue to be the farmer?
Yeah.
I was just wondering about that.
So the question is around whether we're looking at working with farmers who want to put their land into the commons and continue to be the farmer. One example that I know of is not quite that. There's so many farmers who are wanting to transition their land, and their children aren't interested, and they're trying to figure out how to pass on the farm to the next generation of farmers. So we are in conversation with some farmers about how to bring the land in the commons and how they could be, either live on the land until the end of their lives or live nearby, provide some mentorship for the new farmers. So there is that kind of thing. Anyone else want to share?
Yeah, I don't think we've directly done that, but I think our model can totally do that and do that in a way that is ensures that the farmer's retirement is still secure, and some of the projects we have talked about, I don't know that any of them end up moving forward for other reasons, but like, life tenancy was definitely included, and there's some discussion around like reducing the amount of the land that the existing farmer is doing like over the years while a new farmer kind of comes on board and takes place. But that's part of what's so cool is it's really flexible for these kind of different needs.
Yeah, could you give me an example of like what you imagine when you say partnership with Indigenous communities, besides just like, providing food or resources?
So the question is, can we give an example of what it might look like to partner with Indigenous communities?
Yeah, I think like the main thing is that like we use the words Indigenous community as an umbrella, and I want to be careful to not like sort of slip into pan-Indianism, and that these are all separate nations and cultures and have different needs. And so like our role primarily is to sort of like, if we have resources that are matching the interest and capacity to like meet people in those resources and then get out of the way. So it would really be sort of like, what do those folks want? Like, do they want a cultural access easement? Do they want to have land transferred to then be held as either part of a formal tribal system and they're part of like the 501c25, or do they want to have it be members of the community, but it's not sort of in the existing governance structures? That's a bit sort of what's happening with the Black Swamp Project. It's folks from the Nipmuc community, but it is not the Nipmuc like tribal governments. I think it looks really, really different, and we are open to what the ask is and trying to meet that rather than coming in with a prescribed idea.
It seems like that should be known first with regard to like the Whitby property before like a farmer applies with like a plan and all of this stuff. If they had a better idea of like what the local tribes wanted to dump that land. Just a thought.
Yeah, I would love to have that. The history of the land, to the best I know, is it was ceded during the Treaty of Point Elliott, which of course the state and federal government has continued to violate in multiple ways, and there's sort of like this complicated things, particularly because of there's some nations that have federal recognition and there's some nations that don't have federal recognition. So I think that this is definitely an area that we have room for improvement, and in an ideal world I'd love to have that. But I'll be honest that I've been like the primary lead on trying to build these relationships, and COVID has just hit folks really, really hard, and the folks that I'm in relationship with are sort of like, we're excited to talk to you, and we need to like wait until our communities are in a safer place.
And I think just to add to that, I want to name that there is this inherent tension between trying to create a framework to support agrarian food systems while simultaneously honoring Indigenous food systems. And there's a tension there. And I think what we're trying to do is to invite people into being in that tension with us. We don't have an answer. We don't have something specific on paper that we can point to and say this is what it looks like to weave those two things together. But to sit in that uncertain and uncomfortable space of recognizing the inherent value, but also conflict between the two.
I will add that the Tilth, the South Whitby Tilth, the neighbor, we get grants from the Tulalip Indian Casino and Reservation. They support our work, what can I say, so there are some relationships there, and they're very supportive of the agrarian work, I think. But we'll see.
I just want to repeat that so folks who are listening in, because I think that's an important recognition, because so often I think when people think about relationships with Indigenous communities as like this unidirectional thing, but the South Whitby Tilth is getting grant funding from the Tulalip tribe, so there's many directions that support and relationships can go.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yes, so would one farm business, your preference would be to one farm business, not two farm businesses apply together to take this land, or
So the question is there a preference for this land on Whidbey Island for one farm business, or would
or could it be
the commons
more?
be open to multiple farm businesses sharing the land?
like welcome your, like, just sort of, like, my understanding is sort of like, we are gonna have a lease with one entity, but what that entity looks like, we do not have an attachment, to that.
Well, we do, but.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we already talked about that.
Yeah, but it would be complicated, yeah.
Well,
It's
yeah.
not,
They'd have
it's
to
not
be
a
their
huge
own.
piece of land.
Yeah.
It's not a huge piece of land.
But, yesterday we went and looked at small farms, and, these people are starting on, well, not starting, they've been there a while. 3 acres is the most they can manage, and that's, yeah. So, there's a lot of land there, yeah, in terms of the,
I can say that, like, for the applications that we've gotten so far, some of them have been, like, this is a couple that want to farm, or this is a single entity, and some of them have been, like, collective community projects. So, like, we're already hitting in again, and we're, like, open to both of those. And, yeah, to us, it's just about, like, are these folks that we can build a really strong partnership with, particularly because this is the first commons project here, so that we can have that as a solid foundation to then grow into a bunch of other different opportunities.
I'm curious about the footprint of your commons. Obviously, Montana is massive. And when you were talking, you're mentioning that there's other land in this Puget Sound region that you're considering for this common. Is it also on Whidbey Island when we're in a more urban and urban adjacent space? How far away is too far away to successfully build this relationship model?
So the question is around the scope, the kind of footprint of the commons, how big they are, what's the geographic scope? Do you want to talk about the Puget Sound Commons? I can talk a little bit more generally.
Yeah, I feel like I'm jumping in a lot, Addie, so like if you want to dive in first.
I think we don't have a great answer yet. Our focus in the last year since we really formed as a board is let's figure out how to get this one property in the hands of folks who can start growing food on it. And then, so we really haven't had, we're different from some of the other commons in that we were created because we were gifted this land. As opposed to deciding we want to have a commons, determining the geographic scope, and then starting to identify pieces of land. So I think because of that, we're in a little bit more of a reactive or opportunistic position, and we haven't totally had the space to step back and do some of that strategic visioning about how far is too far. I have my own personal ideas about how far is too far and what might feel challenging to try to steward as a board that is based in the Puget Sound. But so far, as far as I'm aware, the other kind of opportunities that have come up as potentials are sort of within the greater Puget Sound basin. This is ongoing. I feel like this is kind of the answer to every question. Like, we don't know, we're figuring it out. Stay tuned. But that's part of the fun of it too.
Yeah, and I think it really depends on, for the other commons, who's involved. Like in Montana, there's a statewide organization, Trust Montana, that's a community land trust and is focused on affordable housing, and they get inquiries about agricultural land which they didn't have capacity to take on. And so part of creating the Montana Agrarian Commons was a partnership. So that's the one that we have as a C25. So they're one of the parents as well as Agrarian Trust and another nonprofit. So Montana, like the scale of farms is much bigger, and at this point the idea is having the scope be the whole entire state. Whereas in Virginia there are multiple commons already. So a lot of it depends on how, like, what's the scope of the stakeholders that are involved in creating the commons and what makes sense for the geography and the political landscape. The idea is that there are no more than 12 pieces of property and any commons. So it might be that, at some point there's 13 properties in Montana, and then they figure out how to split it out in a way that makes sense. But it could be, an urban rural commons. It could be just focused on one geographic area. It could be a whole state but focused on a particular, kind of agriculture. So there's a lot of different ways that it could be depending on what the interests are of the stakeholders who are creating the commons together.
Yeah, I like from a national sort of perspective, and the conversations we've been having, like, it was called the Puget Sound Common, Puget Sound Washington Agrarian Commons, and not the Washington Agrarian, like, for a reason, sort of a recognition of that the types of agriculture happening on the east side of the state, the needs of that community are going to be really different, and we didn't want to like how to, I think we're all too aware of sort of like the tensions of like west of the Cascades, east of the Cascades, and sort of like attention and resources and all of those things, and we didn't want to set that up within a commons. But as we're building relationships here, Puget Sound Commons, I have an eye as the nursery log of this project. Severin, that was my title when we started, as the nursery log of this project. Like, I really have an eye of like, how can we be seeding relationships now for east of the Cascades, you know, to have future collaboration, to have potential to seed other projects that are unique to support the needs of that community.
Just so folks are aware, we started late and we're supposed to end late, so we have 5 more minutes if you want to stay and ask more questions. But just so you know, you're not missing the next workshop by staying till 10:30. Anyone else have a question or a comment you want to share?
Yeah.
This is a question. We read recently that the third generation Japanese American farm Inaba Produce in Yakima is entering into a new arrangement with the Yakima Nation. And I know several of the Inaba family and thought that was really a wonderful thing. Is there any connection with what they're doing and creating a commons on that piece of land? Are you in touch with that effort?
So the question is about the Inaba family in Yakima and a great project that I don't know much about. Do either of you have connections with that?
I'm aware of it. We're not, as a you know, the Puget Sound Commons or the Trust, we're not directly connected to the project. I think it's a reflection of, there are a lot of people that are thinking about how to do this work of partnering with indigenous communities and to find that nexus between agrarian and indigenous food systems. And I need to do more research about that project to understand the nuance of it, because you're right, it does seem really exciting.
Yeah, well, if there's not any other questions, like, we're really grateful for you all giving us your time and attention and for getting the opportunity to share this. I'm going to be at the conference all weekend, so feel free to come grab me and I can send you direct, you know, additional resources. So I really encourage you to go to our website and sign up for our newsletter. We are not very aggressive about sending out, like, well, you'll only hear from us when we have something to say or to get an update like once a month. We're not going to spam you with a bunch of stuff. We're also on every social media platform except for Snapchat. So if you, wherever you like to hang out, if it's not Snapchat, come hang out with us. We're even trying out TikTok. Yeah, come hang out. Share. We do a lot of storytelling of these really unique community projects that are happening around the country and the opportunities, and it's a pretty feel good social media place to be in. So if you need a bit of that, come plug in.
And if anybody wants to know about the dirt on that property, I farm at Tilts next door, so I can tell you about the dirt.
Oh, you mean the literal actual dirt?
The soil. Oh yeah, and the dirt too. Actually, I can give you some on the dirt too. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, there will be.
Yeah, there will be. Yeah.
So Anza from
Southwood
Beach-Hill has also offered, if you're interested in the soil of the land or the dirt on the area, that you can contact her.
Thanks for your interest and your great questions.
Yeah, let's get some next generation farmers onto some land, y'all.
This is a new project. We don't have a lot of experience.
Right. Thanks everybody for filling out these evaluations. You can give them to me or now or on your way out. Appreciate it. Excellent. Yeah.
What's going on? I mean, when you see the impact, it's quite a bit.
Thank you.
Right, yeah. Right.
For profit, I wouldn't say
nonprofit versus a giant.
Are we all different?
Yeah.
I'm surprised he isn't already.
Some of our larger farms are like 700.
I know, right? It's so close. Yeah, I guess I can't.
So we're not
too much on
attached to the
my
type of production.
This was my first. I don't have an experience with nonprofit in relation to for-profit. Well, so my family did related so and that's for-profit. But so for
I
them,
raised pigs. We have unique challenges.
we own 14 acres, but it's just my one farm job.
Yeah.
But it's all monoculture.
Yeah, no, we're into animal
But
production
it's so
with
strange because,
equal enthusiasm.
he only
Part of the
mixes
reason we did
enough
orcharding
in
on this one is because we recognized that the cornerstone was not tillable, so we wanted to put it into some kind of production to help, feed that income, and also that is best to run chickens or pigs or things that are
can't really to send out and be like, hey, here's like 5 acres. Right. Like, which is so strange because it's like 1,400.
I get it. No, we are totally into things, and I mean, as you probably know, like that market is really rich. Like the row crop market on that scale is pretty.